I walked into that classroom thinking it was just another parents' meeting. You know, cramped chairs, awkward smiles, and a few tired teachers trying to keep it all on schedule. Ethan was by my side, joking about how he should have brought snacks like the other dads. For a moment, I felt calm. It's silly, but doing something together like this, even if it's just showing up for our son, gave me this quiet sense of normalcy. Like maybe, just maybe, we were still on the same team. Then the door opened, and everything in me changed. She walked in like she owned the air around her. Julia. I'd seen her before in passing, always that same polished look and just the right touch of charm. We'd never spoken, barely nodded. But the second Ethan saw her, I felt it. His back straightened, his eyes lingered. Just a fraction of a second too long. But enough for my heart to catch it and skip. I didn't say anything. What would I have said? But something shifted. I could feel the smile fading from my face even as I tried to hold it. You know when the room stays the same, but suddenly you're not in it the same way anymore? That's what it felt like I was watching a scene I wasn't supposed to be part of. Ethan looked like someone who'd just seen a ghost, and not the scary kind, the kind that still makes your chest ache. I tried to focus on the meeting, really I did. But every time I glanced at Ethan, he wasn't the man I walked in with. Not completely. His shoulders were tense, his hands kept fidgeting with the sleeve of his shirt, and he wasn't listening. Not to the teacher, not to anything. His eyes kept finding her across the room. And hers? Oh, Julia wasn't subtle. She smiled at him like they shared a secret, like the rest of us were just background noise. I sat there, nodding through some update about field trips, but my stomach, it was twisting. Then came the laugh. God, that laugh. Someone made a joke, something dumb about bake sales, and suddenly, they both laughed, but not like everyone else. It was too in sync, too knowing. That kind of laugh doesn't come from strangers. That laugh comes from history. And in that moment, I didn't care how many cupcakes Julia could bake. I wanted to know what she was doing in our life, because Ethan was no PTA dad. He never volunteered for anything. So when Julia raised her hand to help with the fundraiser, and out of nowhere, Ethan raised his too, I didn't smile. I froze. He didn't even glance at me for approval, for support. Nothing. Just offered himself up like he suddenly cared about school events. My hands tightened in my lap, and I smiled to no one, just to keep myself from unraveling right there in front of 20 parents and a second-grade teacher. But my brain was racing, trying to make sense of the performance I was watching. Because that's what it was. A performance. And Ethan? He was playing a role I didn't recognize. After the meeting ended, people started mingling, gathering their coats, chatting about rides and snacks and weekend games. I stood up slowly, giving Ethan the chance to walk out with me. But he didn't. Instead, he drifted to the side of the room, right to where Julia was standing. I watched him lean in, speak low, and smile in that quiet, intimate way. She touched his arm, barely. But I saw it. And I saw him let her. Not pull away, not look around, just stay there like they were the only two people in the room. I waited a beat too long before walking over. My voice was light when I asked, "Who's that?" He didn't miss a beat, just shrugged and said, "Just one of the moms. I think our kids play together sometimes." I nodded, pretending that answer meant something. But inside, I felt like a wire had snapped, because that wasn't just one of the moms. That wasn't how you look at someone you barely know. That wasn't how you talk to someone you only see in passing. I've been married to Ethan long enough to recognize the look, the history, the flicker of something buried just beneath the surface. And no matter how good he was at brushing it off, my gut had already spoken. There was more to that woman than he was letting on. And something told me this story was just beginning. The car ride home should have felt normal. It didn't. Ethan was humming along to some radio song like nothing had happened, like we hadn't just sat in a room where something unspoken screamed between every glance. I stared out the window, nodding absently as he talked about homework and soccer practice. But my mind was still back in that classroom, replaying every second. The look Julia gave him, the way his face changed when she walked in, the kind of tension that doesn't come from strangers. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid. But that little voice in my head, the one I've learned to trust after all these years, it wouldn't shut up. And then I started noticing the small things, the way he checked his phone more than usual, the way he smiled to himself at random moments, the way he said her name, not out loud, but behind his eyes. It's hard to explain, but when you love someone long enough, you recognize when they've let someone else in, even if they haven't said a word. I kept telling myself, don't jump to conclusions. You'll look crazy, you'll sound jealous. But deep down, I already knew. Something had shifted, something had returned, and I couldn't unsee it. At dinner, he talked about how great it was that more parents were getting involved with the school. I forced a smile and nodded, all while remembering how he used to grumble about meetings like they were torture. But now, he was suddenly eager, suddenly invested. And I knew it had nothing to do with field trips. I watched him more closely after that, not in a loud, accusing way. No, I was quiet. Still, like someone trying to listen through a wall. And what I saw only confirmed what I was already feeling. The way he laughed a little too hard at something Julia said, the way his eyes darted over to her when he thought I wasn't looking. There was a rhythm to it, a back and forth that didn't belong in a room full of teachers and tired parents. It was the kind of energy that makes your skin prickle, even when no one else seems to notice. Then came the moment that sealed it. Julia volunteered to help with the school fundraiser. I barely looked up, because of course she did. She seemed like the type. But what I didn't expect, what truly caught me off guard, was Ethan raising his hand right after her. My head turned before I could even hide it. He met my eyes just briefly, not with excitement, not with joy, but with that flash of guilt he couldn't quite mask in time. And then he smiled like it was no big deal, like this was just something new he wanted to try. Ethan doesn't do bake sales. He doesn't sign up. This was a man who once claimed he was allergic to parent-teacher nights. And now, here he was, suddenly enthusiastic about raffle tickets and donation bins. Please. It wasn't about the fundraiser. It was about her. Every instinct in my body was screaming it. I could feel the weight of it in my chest, heavy and sharp, pressing down on everything I thought I understood about my marriage. After the meeting ended, I didn't leave right away. I watched. I stood near the hallway pretending to scroll through my phone, while Ethan made his way toward her. Again. They spoke quietly, heads tilted just close enough to make me feel sick. He leaned in like he was telling her something personal. And she laughed. Not politely, not nervously, but the kind of laugh that says, I know you. And he looked at her like he wished no one else was in the room. That was when my breath caught in my throat. I walked over, casually enough, pretending I hadn't just watched my husband flirt with another woman in a school hallway. Who is she? I asked, not even trying to hide the question behind small talk. Ethan blinked like I'd broken some invisible moment, then shrugged. Just one of the moms from school. I think our kids play sometimes. I stared at him for a second longer than I should have, nodding slowly. That wasn't just one of the moms. That wasn't just a friendly chat, and he knew I knew it. On the way home, I barely spoke. I let him fill the silence with weather updates and to-do lists, acting like nothing had happened. But something had happened. I just didn't know the full story yet. Not yet. All I knew was that the air between us had shifted, and there was no pretending otherwise anymore. I wish I could say I let it go, that I trusted him, that I told myself I was just overthinking, but that would be a lie. Because the truth? I couldn't stop thinking about it, about her, about them. That look, that smile, that sudden desire to get involved with the school. It all kept looping in my head like a bad song I couldn't shut off. So the next morning, while he was in the shower, I picked up his phone. My hands were shaking, and I hated myself for doing it. But I needed to know. I deserved to know. There wasn't anything obvious. No hearts, no I miss yous, Nothing sloppy. Ethan's not stupid. If he's hiding something, he's not leaving it out in the open. But then I noticed her name in his search history. Julia. Not once, not twice, several times. And not recently. Over months. What was he looking at? Her profile? Her photos? His expression when he saw her had said enough. But now I had something. Not proof, not yet, but a thread. And once you start pulling on a thread like that, it's only a matter of time before everything unravels. That night, while he slept next to me, so peaceful, so unaware, I opened my laptop. I started digging. Old photos, tagged pictures, event archives. It didn't take long. One album from a company party years ago nearly knocked the breath out of me. There they were, Ethan and Julia, arm in arm, smiling like they'd done it 100 times before. It was dated long before our son was born, before school ever brought us all together. Which meant one thing: this wasn't new. Julia wasn't some recent acquaintance. She was part of his past, and he never told me. I stared at that photo like it was some kind of puzzle piece I didn't even know I was missing. His arm around her waist, her leaning in, not stiff or awkward, but natural. Familiar. That kind of closeness you don't fake for a photo. And the worst part? The way he was smiling. That soft, unguarded smile I used to believe was mine. I sat there for what felt like forever, just frozen. My fingers hovered over the mouse, but I couldn't click away. I couldn't look at anything else. The truth was staring me in the face, and it felt like the floor beneath me had cracked wide open. I kept scrolling, clicking through posts I never cared about before. And suddenly, all the little things Ethan had said over the years, names dropped, vague timelines, stories that didn't quite line up, started rearranging themselves into something clearer, something darker. Julia wasn't some woman he bumped into at school events. She wasn't a stranger. They had history, the kind you keep quiet when you don't want to explain it. And now that I knew, now that I really knew, I couldn't unknow it. The heartbreak came first, a dull, hollow ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But right behind it came something sharper, something steadier. Not rage, not even sadness. Clarity. I couldn't prove they were still seeing each other, but I could feel it, and I realized in that moment I didn't need to catch him texting her. I didn't need the cliché of lipstick on a collar. I just needed to catch him in a lie. Because if I could do that, then it wouldn't just be suspicion anymore. It would be truth. The next few days felt like a performance I never auditioned for. I smiled when I needed to. I asked about his day. I kissed him goodnight. But inside, I was gathering pieces, watching patterns, taking mental notes. Every time he picked up his phone and tilted it away from me, every time he left the room to make a quick call, it added to the quiet case I was building. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was focused. And that scared me more than the heartbreak ever could. I started planting small traps. Nothing dramatic, just little questions here and there. Casual ones like, "Have you seen that mom from the meeting again?" Or, "Didn't you say you didn't know her?" And every time he'd brush it off with that easy grin of his, that practiced deflection. And I'd nod, pretending to believe him, while inside I was counting the cracks. His story changed in subtle ways. Tiny contradictions he didn't even notice. But I noticed, because now I was listening differently. At night, when the house was quiet and he was asleep beside me, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, feeling this strange mix of grief and power. The betrayal was still raw, but now I had direction. I wasn't just the wife left in the dark, I was the woman turning on the light. And something told me, it wouldn't be long before I had the one piece of evidence I needed to tear the whole thing wide open. I didn't come at him swinging. That's not who I am. No yelling, no dramatic accusations. I waited until we were alone, just the two of us in the kitchen, after dinner. I pulled up the photo on my phone, the one of him and Julia, arm in arm, years ago. I placed it on the counter between us without a word. He stared at it, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't have a smile. No deflection, no quick excuse. Just silence. and that silence told me everything. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost apologetic. "We had a thing," he said. "Years ago. Before you. It didn't mean anything." I just stared at him, waiting for the part where he'd tell me why he never thought to mention that his ex was now one of the moms at our son's school. He didn't say it. He just looked at me like a child caught with crumbs on his face, insisting he hadn't touched the cookies. "It didn't matter," he said again, like that would erase the lie by omission. But it did matter. It mattered that he'd lied, that he'd pretended she was a stranger, that he'd let me sit across from her in that classroom, completely in the dark. I felt like a fool, not because he'd had a past, we all have one, but because he'd hidden her knowing full well the impact she'd have. And while I tried to process that, his phone lit up on the counter. A message preview flashed across the screen before either of us could stop it. From Julia. And all it said was, "I can't stop thinking about last week." I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. That message sat there like a bomb that had already gone off. All that was left was the silence afterward. Ethan froze. His mouth opened, then closed. He didn't even try to make up a story this time. Didn't say it was a joke or a misunderstanding. He just stared at me, like maybe if he looked sorry enough, I'd pretend I didn't see it. But there's no apology big enough to cover that kind of betrayal. Not when it's spelled out right in front of you. I took a deep breath, and I think that's when he realized I was done. Not angry, not screaming, just done. "You can explain it to her," I said quietly. "Because you won't be explaining anything to me, not under this roof." His eyes widened like he thought I might still listen, still fight for this, but I wasn't interested in begging a man to be loyal. I wasn't going to sit through another performance where he played the good husband, and I pretended to believe him. He tried to speak, to reach for me, but I stepped back. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough to draw the line. And it wasn't just about the cheating. It was the lying, the gaslighting. The quiet choices that told me I didn't matter enough to be told the truth. I'd always imagined heartbreak would be loud, maybe even violent. But standing there in our kitchen, all I felt was cold. Not numb, not shocked, just clear. So painfully, beautifully clear. I didn't pack a suitcase. Not right then. I didn't slam doors or toss clothes into a bag while crying. That's what movies show, not real life. In real life, betrayal feels heavier, quieter. I walked to our bedroom, closed the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed like a woman who had just stepped outside her own skin. I looked around that room, our room, and every memory suddenly had a question mark attached to it. Every laugh, every lazy Sunday morning, every kiss. Was she always there, just under the surface? Later that night, I tucked our son into bed like nothing had changed. I kissed his forehead, pulled the blanket up around him, and smiled like I wasn't breaking apart inside. Because he didn't need to know. Not yet. Not now. This was between Ethan and me. And soon, it would be between me and a decision I already felt forming in my chest. I didn't need more proof. I had enough. I had more than enough. And what I needed now wasn't another answer. It was space, room to breathe, room to decide what life I wanted to walk into next. Ethan slept on the couch that night. I didn't ask him to. I didn't have to. He knew. We didn't say goodnight. There was nothing left to say that could fix what had already shattered. And as I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It wasn't warm, it wasn't comforting, but it was solid. I knew what I had to do next. And that knowledge, as painful as it was, gave me something I hadn't had in days. Control. I left the house the next afternoon with a small bag and a steady hand. No drama, no scene. Just the sound of my car door closing and the weight of my son's backpack in the back seat. We drove to my friend Melissa's place. She's the kind of woman who doesn't ask 1,000 questions, just opens her door and makes tea. I didn't cry when I got there. I didn't need to. I'd cried enough already, and what I felt now wasn't sadness. It was something cleaner, more resolved. I'd made my choice. I was done living in the shadow of someone else's secrets. Melissa gave us the guest room, and my son thought it was some kind of sleepover adventure. He asked if Daddy was coming too. I smiled gently and told him, "Just us tonight." And that's how it started. A new kind of quiet. One without the weight of wondering, without the second guessing. I didn't tell him what happened. He's too young. But I did hug him a little longer. Watched him fall asleep with his stuffed dinosaur curled under his arm and thought, this is the only man I need to protect now. The next morning I called the school. Not to make a scene, just to update our emergency contacts and make sure all communication went through me moving forward. I asked them to remove Ethan from the volunteer list, politely, firmly. I didn't explain why. I didn't owe them that. And when I hung up the phone, something shifted. It wasn't big, it wasn't dramatic. But it felt like I had taken a piece of my power back. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was choosing. And that changes everything. Ethan tried reaching out. Of course he did. First it was a text that just said, "Can we talk?" Then a longer one, about how sorry he was, how he never meant to hurt me, how it wasn't what it looked like. I didn't reply. I didn't even open the rest. Because I've learned something about apologies. When they come only after someone's caught, they're not really for you. They're for them, for their guilt, for their comfort, and I wasn't about to hand mine over so easily. He tried calling too. I let it ring. My phone lit up with his name over and over, but I never touched it, not once. Blocking him felt cold at first. Too final. But eventually, it started to feel like protection, like drawing a boundary that was long overdue. And I realized I didn't need to hear one more excuse. I didn't need to sit through another performance of his regret, because what happened wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, 1,000 little choices he made, knowing I'd be the one left with the pieces. I kept my distance at school too. No small talk, no forced smiles at drop-off. I walked my son in, kissed him goodbye, and left. If Julia was there, I didn't look at her. I didn't give her that power. Let them wonder what I knew. Let them fill in the blanks. I wasn't interested in turning this into some messy drama. I wasn't there to play the role of the scorned wife. I was just done. Quietly, fully, and absolutely done. A week later, I found myself sitting on a park bench while my son played in the distance. The sun was low, that warm golden kind of light that makes everything feel softer. I watched him laugh as he chased after a ball with another kid, completely unaware of how much had changed. And maybe that's what made me smile. The fact that his world was still full of joy, even when mine had shifted beneath my feet. That meant I was doing something right. I took a deep breath and realized I felt peace. Not the loud kind, not the kind that comes with closure or a neat ending, just the quiet, steady kind that settles into your bones when you finally stop trying to fix something that broke a long time ago. I wasn't healed, I wasn't whole, but I wasn't shattered either. I was clear. And in that clarity, I found something I hadn't had in a long time, the courage to move forward without dragging my past behind me. For the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was. Not Ethan's wife, not someone's second choice, not a woman in waiting. I was me. And I knew now what I would never accept again, not just in love, but in life. I sat there on that bench, hand curled around my coffee cup, eyes on my son, and felt something I never expected to feel in the middle of heartbreak. Freedom.